Ireland pursues an independent course in foreign policy, but it is not neutral between liberty and tyranny, and never will be.
Congo got its independence from Belgium on the 30th of June 1960, and this was part of a wind of change that was moving through Africa in 1960 and 61, countries getting independence from their former colonial masters. Some countries managed it well, some didn't, and the Belgians didn't manage it well. Congo got its independence, the Belgians withdrew, and then almost immediately the new government of Patrice Lumumba faced a number of crises. It was completely incapable of governing, it lacked experience, and the army, the force publique, mutinied. And so the country began to collapse only days after getting its independence from Belgium. So the instability in Congo caused by the collapse of the near collapse of the new government was one of the reasons that the UN had to get involved, and involved very quickly, to try and prop up what looked like becoming what we now call a failed state. Another problem with Congo immediately after independence was that Congo, being a federal state, a number of the provinces that made up the country declared their independence. One of these being the mineral-rich province of Katanga that held so much of the world's supply of uranium and other precious strategic metals.
In July, the word was out that the UN wanted an Irish battalion for the Congo, and at the time the papers were full of the Congo news: independence, mutiny of the local Congolese military forces, Patrice Lumumba. He was the Prime Minister. He was noted for his speech on Independence Day in the presence of the Belgian king and a lot of others. He said that the Congolese would no longer be the king's monkeys. So that didn't go down well with the local white and Belgian population.
The Western Bloc, the Soviet Union, the United States, all had vested interests in stabilizing or destabilizing Congo, and it seemed that the one neutral body that could come in and try and stabilize Congo was the United Nations.
The UN took fright. Belgian forces were asked to withdraw. There was widespread panic and trouble and atrocities, you might say, and Russia threatening to intervene. The UN headquarters in New York, led by Dag Hammarskjöld, saw this as an ideal situation for the UN to try to establish a peacekeeping role for itself. So it set about organising battalions from neutral countries, including Ireland for one. And that's how the 32nd Battalion came about in late July.
When the request came through from the UN Secretariat, from Secretary-General Dag Hammarskjöld, for Ireland to provide a contingent, Aiken jumped at the possibility because it was absolutely part of the obligations and responsibilities that he, as Minister for External Affairs, expected would be part of Ireland's UN membership, that Ireland was now showing actively its engagement with the UN.
I had managed to persuade the beautiful Aer Lingus hostess to be my wife. And we were planned to have our marriage in September 1960. So along came mid-1960, and of course the Congo exploded on the international scene. And all the Defence Forces were asked to volunteer for overseas service. So I did, as everybody else. We all volunteered to a man, I think.
Well, in 1960 I was married with 3 children. I was living in the city and stationed in Conn's Barracks in Cork. I went in of a Monday, little known at the time that this would be a life-changing experience for us all that particular day.
But when the announcement came on around the middle of July that there was a troop going to the Congo, on the very first peacekeeping mission by an Irish battalion. Teeth inspected, see what I'd stand up to 6 months in the Congo, and rushed back up to Dublin, told to pack my bags. I was going to the Congo. They had suddenly discovered or realised that French was the language in the Congo, and that this young innocent officer who was just commissioned would probably be a very useful addition.
Now, of course, this caused mayhem among our families because we had our wedding arrangements all made for September. So we decided to bring our wedding forward to the 13th of August. But we only had 6 days left after that before I left. So to her eternal credit, my wife agreed to a 6-day honeymoon in a most unexpected location, the Curragh camp, where 6 days later I found myself at Baldonnel in the bowels of a Globemaster aircraft taking off for Wheeler Space.
My mother got a call, I think from my father, saying he was being transferred to the Congo. She was very upset. I think she had a fear of Darkest Africa. In
July then, the 1st Battalion was formed, and 32nd Battalion, and I was nominated to be in charge of a Guard of Honour for Sean the Mass, the Taoiseach, when the 32nd Battalion paraded through O'Connell Street before they left.
Now, up comes July 1960, Congo. I was a young sergeant at the time. I volunteered. I was not selected, so I was quite happy not to be selected. I was on the range the following day, so I came home that evening from the range and I was told, "You're picked." So-and-so got cried off and the other fellow failed the medical. Went home and told my wife, my young 20-year-old wife. We both fully didn't understand. We were both kind of numbed by the whole kind of thing.
I suppose looking back on it, and it's very vivid to me, the memory of that particular day, the discussions, looking for maps to find out where we were going, what was going on out there. It was very hard to get information.
Families didn't know what hit them. The men wanted off for the adventure, and that was that.
Time went on then into August, and the government was asked for a 2nd Battalion. And I was lucky to be appointed as a platoon commander in A Company, number 3 Platoon, A Company, 33rd Battalion.
So that was it. I was on, and before I knew what, I was carrying the flag down O'Connell Street in front of a parade of 700 men and officers, down through Dame Street, across the bridge, into O'Connell Street with crowds cheering on both sides. The excitement was unbelievable. But the French and the flag carrying and the ADC thing all put me there in the front of that battalion.
I was thinking going home how I was going to preach this to my wife. Unfortunately, that was it anymore. And so I said, I went into her and I said, I'm volunteering for a trip abroad for 24 weeks rather than say 6 months. One of the reasons so many volunteered, we have this kind of mundane type of lifestyle, and here's an opportunity now with all our training maybe to put into practice. I remember getting a torch, some snappy underwear and pyjamas. First time in the army, soldiers ever got an issue of pyjamas. Our equipment wasn't really suitable for overseas, but nobody said nothing. We still had our hobnail boots and our heavy uniforms and grey back shirts going out, but there was no complaints. Everybody just got on with the job.
I do remember the company was brought by bus so to the Dublin Zoo to see what kind of animals they might see in the Congo. But as it turned out, we didn't see any, except a few snakes.
And I didn't even have time to visit or talk to my aged parents in the country. On the morning of the 22nd, of course, heading off. And at 6 o'clock that morning, she made breakfast. We kissed, I hugged the baby, and we said goodbye. Now, she said to me, God, she'll be 8 months when you come back. So I got on my bike, 6:30, cycled off for Collins Barracks. It would be much easier actually to face an execution than the way I felt that morning. I think it was the most heartrending thing of all my life, actually. I never forgot it even to this day. I was going down the road on my bike and I said, "Oh, Jesus, you haven't even told your mother and father that you're going." So I was going to the Congo and that's it. My neighbour said to me, "I'll collect the bike this evening for you, Dick," he said. I got a letter after that and he said, I went up that evening. There was no bike there, he said. So that was the end of the bike.
Starting College Barracks, where the company were paraded and addressed by the Lord Mayor of Cork, Alderman Stephen Barrett, I remember. He said very fine words to us. We were blessed by the chaplain and the barrack square, addressed by the General Officer Commanding at the time, and then we were into trucks and off to the Curragh. I did many parades in my career, but in this particular one, people were cheering and clapping. Thousands of people, they clapped the whole way down. It was a marvellous send-off from the people of Dublin that time.
Oh, they were delighted. My mother actually, when she was in her younger days, used to teach just outside the Curragh and had a great fondness for the army. And she was absolutely thrilled, as was my father. They were proud. They were delighted. The trip out would probably be considered fourth class. When we arrived at the end of the parade at the Rotunda, we were all then unceremoniously piled into trucks and driven out to Baldonnel. From there, then we were herded on to the Globe Masters, where we sat in funny kind of chairs, our backs to the fuselage. And for the trip out, we had a variety of temperatures, even at one stage, been sitting on ice.
And this American pilot came over and he gave us a briefing. He asked us, and he was ever fly before. So we said, "No, sir," in good Cork accents to him. And he told us a flight plan where he was going. He said, "We'll be flying from here," he said, "to Évora in France, and then on to Tripoli, and then on to Kano, Nigeria, and then on to Libreville in the Congo." Everyone was issued with a plastic bag with an apple, an orange, 2 sandwiches and a bottle of milk. So here we've gone off to our plastic bags up onto the plane. But I can tell you they were useful because we used them.
On we went to the Globe Masters anyway, Hercules 130 higher planes. Most uncomfortable thing of all time. You sat in a strap seat with your knees crunched up, and if you stretched your legs, you kicked somebody else and he effed you out of it, like. But you didn't hear what he said anyway because the sound was terrible. You actually wrote notes to the fellow beside you if you want to talk to him. And the best unit is a unit all from the one unit and all from the one area. But I can tell you that this mix and gathering that I had turned out to be one hell of a friend bunch.
There were no combat uniforms available in those days, and no tropical uniforms either. Only the green home issue, which was it's of good quality and serviceable for home use, but not exactly serviceable for the tropical climate.
I had French. I was translating for anybody, everybody. So it was a lot of translation, but then it was very often been sent off on any kind of odd job that turned up.
We landed there, and when the tail of the plane opened, it was like walking into an oven. It was really warm, hot, and of course we weren't dressed for it. I remember a sergeant there, an American sergeant, asked me were we going to the North Pole. Colleagues and my friends there, the NCOs, they worked really hard, and I think they got the opportunity to show their worth as well in going out and being able to do all these jobs they got to do overseas that they wouldn't have got at home.
You realised an awful lot of things when you landed in Wheelers. The heat was terrible in your dress. Some of the soldiers took off their tunics and slacks and put on their newly issued first time out pyjamas. We went from there then, we were heading right into it. We headed for Kindu on the equator. First thing that happened when we got off the plane at the airport, Sergeant Irwin, pick 6 men, you're on guard here. So I was on guard and got four bivvies, got our rifles mounted, stayed there, and my orders were, you're on guard, we'll collect you in the morning.
Fortunately, it was an American base and there was air conditioning. And when we got into that, I said to myself, this is exactly what it'd be like going into heaven if I ever make it.
At Camino, our job there was to deny the airport to any hostile forces. At that time, Niemba had got some Russian Ilyushin aircraft which they thought had the potential of landing with us and taking over the base. So we had to deny that to them. So the way that we did it was to put trucks on the airport, on the runways.
The rest of our supplies was by air to the airport. And one of them was a small plane, a single-engine plane. The door flew off and we were met with a gust of cold air for the rest of the journey. And the second plane was a DC-3. A fire broke out in a compartment behind the pilot. The second pilot spent the next half hour with fire extinguishers extinguishing the fire, which he did, but the cabin was full of smoke for the rest of the journey.
The officer said to me, Sarge, you go in the lead truck. So I said, James, I'm in the lead truck. I want to know where I'm going anyway. And so I went into the office and I said, have we got a map of this joint, like where are we going to? And the man said to me, no, you don't need any map, he said, because you go down there, turn left, he says, and go 200 miles and you'll be happy. You'll be there.
Also, on my faint memory down in Camino, outside the base where I was working, there was a piano of some sort, and I used to play it occasionally, and the young black people used to come up, and I'd have them dancing around the piano. So it wasn't doing any harm anyways.
You could get into some sticky situations, it's the soldier's job, where I've been in some situations there that, because of the language, it became very dangerous, and if you haven't an interpreter, very hard to communicate. And unfortunately, to the Congolese, blue beret didn't mean very much. You were white, and everything white was Belgian.
The group of our people arrived by convoy with all our stores. They arrived by road from Albertville. It was a harrowing journey, and their stories were harrowing of unrest on the road and bows and arrows and locals shouting at them and stopping them and things like that with roadblocks. They had a river to cross, which led to hours of negotiation and things like that. So it was an eye-opener for us that we realised that things were not great in the location.
We were 90 kilometres on a road that was continually being washed away, and in fact our only contact was by helicopter when they were available, but the helicopter used to bring the White Father's priest out to say mass to us every Sunday. Because the road was so bad he couldn't go on the road. So we knew we were on our own. If we were attacked, and there were umpteen scare stories all the time, and no better people than the Belgians, I'm afraid, to keep saying there's thousands of balubas here, there and everywhere. We were forever feeling these things.
So we had built up a good understanding and relationship with the Belgian paratroopers, which I think possibly did help in the taking over situation in Camino Base, where we ended up. Camino Base being a huge NATO base with vast area to control. It was a great opportunity to have a job to do as well as all the translating. So I was kept busy.
And post had a monstrous effect altogether on the soldier. If the soldier didn't get post, and if they went on from 2, 3, 4 weeks, you could see that it was affecting them. They were looking into the sky, and looking out into nowhere, kind of feeling about the whole thing. And when the post came, you could see the eyes lighting up. You could see them sitting around with the letters, naturally enough, all the big smiles. Then you could see a poor devil like, oh, got nothing. All these feckers have letters, I have nothing.
Katanga was the only place that there was any trouble. But it was the only province there was trouble because it was the richest province in the company, and it was owned and what have you by large international businesses. Peacekeeping as such was now beginning to go out the window, leading inevitably to something called peacemaking.
Our mission there was, we were told to stop the Russians from landing. I wrote home and I told my mother where I was and what I was doing, and that I was there that the Russians might land in the place. So she had a great time telling the neighbours and that her son was out in the middle of Africa and he was stopping the Russians from coming in there.
There were numerous nationalities out there. There was Indians, Pakistan, Nigerians, Mali. The Irish soldier is unique in that religion, colour, creed means nothing to him. They're mixed with everybody, friendly with everybody, friendly with the Congolese people, who are a gentle people, by the way.
On the day they looked for reinforcements for Niemba, Kevin Gleeson was the one that was in reserve, the platoon that was in reserve. So he was put on the plane to go there, with fatal results for poor old Kevin.
Something happened there then that really upset everybody. Our troops were killed in Niemba, so we had soldiers going home in coffins.
I was on duty with my platoon at the airport that morning when my signaller came to me and he said, "Jesus, there's 8 fellas after being killed." He said, "Name of the lads that went down here last week." Now that had a bearing on the attitude of soldiers and bearing on the attitude of us, and it had a bearing on the way people looked at the army, like how suitable or unsuitable they were and what the tactics were like.
Another thing that happened, they played back the funeral of the ambush to us, and I think we'd be better off they hadn't. It was very sad and it was very upsetting.
I should also mention the death of a company sergeant, Felix Grant, who was the senior NCO in that company. Tragically died on the 3rd of October. He was a big loss to the company at such an early stage.
The tracks would be torn up here and there. At one stage there was 300 yards of track torn up and we were surrounded by belugas. Fine ambush. Here we were all sitting ducks in the train. But anyway, our interpreters, he negotiated on our behalf and he got them to cool down. And eventually we got them to fix the track and we moved on.
I was approached by the Congolese conductor of a train who rushed up to me saying, "There's a Belgian gone berserk back in the carriage. He's firing his pistol, putting holes through the roof of the carriage." So I grabbed my sergeant and the two of us went down and we found this guy. He was delirious from drugs or drink, and so we just disarmed him. But it was then we knew we weren't on the train to Cork.
On October 28, 1960, Colonel Justin McCarthy was killed in a vehicle accident in Leopoldville, now called Kinshasa, in the Republic of the Congo. He was the first Irish officer to be killed, and as Deputy Chief of Staff, he is to date the most senior officer to be killed on overseas service. Just 2 months into the mission, little thought had been given to the question of where the burial would take place and how the remains would be transported to the place of burial. In Justin McCarthy's case, it was decided to transfer the remains by sea from the Congo for burial in Dublin. The only sea route available was from the port of Matadi in the Congo, Tenerife, the Belgian port of Antwerp, and thence to Dublin via a short stopover in the port of Cork. The journey of over 6,000 miles took place over 3 weeks from the 7th of November and arrived in Dublin on November 30th. The lead casket containing the remains of Colonel McCarthy were received at the Leopoldville train station by Lieutenant Colonel Ferdia Lee and Lieutenant Paddy McNally. These two officers escorted the remains from Leopoldville all the way to Glasnevin Cemetery in Dublin. Lieutenant McNally, later Colonel McNally, recorded the passage home on his home movie camera. It is salutary to recall that as the SS Charlesville departs Matadi, bearing the remains of Colonel McCarthy, some 1,500 miles to the east, the Niemba ambush is taking place. Such was the number of casualties at Niemba and the shock to the Army and Ireland as a whole, the death of Colonel McCarthy was somewhat overshadowed. At Antwerp Dock, the casket reposes at the port mortuary. A simple ceremony takes place at the quayside, attended by the First Secretary, Irish Embassy, the Honorary Irish Consul at Antwerp, Colonel Bell representing the Belgian Army, together with Lieutenant Colonel Lee and Lieutenant McNally. The casket is loaded on the Celtic shipping line ship, the MV City of Waterford, for carriage to Dublin with a stopover at Cork. At Cork, the casket remains in the hold of the ship, and some local dockers take the opportunity to pay their respects.
There was no time between his being told that he was being transferred from Gaza to the Congo, even to come home. And we never saw him again. Then it all ended when I was collected from school one day and taken home, and my mother told me that my father had died in a car crash that morning, and then our life changed.
During the most difficult moments in our lives, we find solace in happy remembrance of those who brought happiness into our lives, and thus gave us strength to accept the inevitable bereavements which life itself faces us with. At this moment, when I cannot be present to say my last farewell to my life's companion, I find solace and contentment in the belief and conviction that Justin has laid down his life in service to better the future of the next generation, in which his young son will participate. My hope and belief is that his son will live to be proud of his father's contribution to this end. We are with you in spirit and in our prayers.
This urban scene is Leopoldville in late 1960, with Congolese protesting in support of the deposed Premier Patrice Lumumba. The protest is set to coincide with the visit of the United Nations Secretary General. The troops are from the Indonesian battalion stationed in Leopoldville, and the unit is conducting local security operations. Some of its elements are portrayed in crowd control configuration in the vicinity of Camp Martini and the UN headquarters. The UN Sikorsky helicopter arriving at Force headquarters is transporting United Nations Secretary General Hammarskjöld and his party. This visit is conducted in the context of continuing problems with the government's stability, the international pressure to reinstate Lumumba, and the widespread political turmoil. All of this at a time when the mandate for the force is scheduled for renewal. Meantime, following his appointment as force commander, Lieutenant General Sean McKeown attended an inaugural welcome parade in Leopoldville in January 1961. His predecessor, General von Horn, had returned to UNSO in Jerusalem. The parade was attended by representatives of troop contributing nations, and the host government is represented by the unmistakable Colonel Mobutu. He would feature in many guises in the future of the Congo. The parade itself is a historic occasion for the force. It is also an impressive event, considering the number of troops on parade, their countries of origin, and the variety of military traditions, uniforms, and arms drill on display. As Lieutenant General McKeown departs from the parade ground, it is worth reflecting on the fact that in less than 6 months from the initial positive response by government regarding participation in the Congo mission, Ireland had deployed 2 battalions to the mission area, overcame the operational challenges, adjusted to difficult climatic conditions, incurred fatal casualties in the course of those duties, and now provided its own Chief of Staff as Force Commander.
Congo was responsible, I think, for creating the defence forces we have today, that Ireland is a world leader in peacekeeping. It's a signature of our foreign policy, part of our international identity, that our defence forces, the men and women of our defence forces, are peacekeepers. And that goes back to what the pioneering battalions did in Kivu, in Katanga, in Goma, in Elizabethville, in the summer of 1960. The Congo deployment wasn't Ireland's first involvement in peacekeeping, because small groups of officers had been sent to the UNTSO and UNIGIL missions in Israel and in Lebanon in 1958. But this was the first big deployment.
We have soldiers all over the world now who have become the best peacekeepers ever. I think they're the best. They're the countries. They're showing themselves to be highly capable and well able to do their jobs, and we're proud of the fact that we were the first to do that. The soldiers were extraordinary young men, 17, 18, young men who matured fairly quickly, I can tell you. They were so good, I'd have gone anywhere in the world with them. Well, the last couple of weeks, you can appreciate everybody gets very careful. They're not going to get shot, they're not going to crash the truck or get into any trouble if we can help it. So it was a kind of an easing down. I remember the last day we packed our bags, our kit bags, and onto the plane and back the same way again. Nigeria and Wheels Air Base in Libya and back to Dublin.
From Cork to the Congo, from Galway to the Gaza Strip, from this legislative assembly to the United Nations, Ireland is sending its most talented men to do the world's most important work, the work of peace. 26 sons of Ireland have died in the Congo. Many others have been wounded. I pay tribute to them and to all of you for your commitment and dedication to world order.